He'd said to us, if you can produce 1 million copies a day, I'll make you the best paid printers in Fleet Street. We were producing 3.25 million. He was getting such a surplus of cash. He must have changed his mind into empire building.
Because the riot police were coming up here like full shields, and when they come at you, it'd be like a Zulu thing. They just beat their shields, so it was like boom, boom, boom. You were just like, what is this English? What, you know, is this meant to be happening?
The words business started to turn up all the time instead of the service we were giving to the people. It did change from what it was.
Chop the head off the beast and the rest will fall down. I mean, even the manager turned round to the media and said we were a cancer that needed cutting out.
It was just a case of, this is it. And you, and comply or we are closing the place down.
Men had lost their jobs. We thought obviously my dad would get the blame, which a lot of people did blame him for.
Including the Prime Minister?
Yes.
We have a real problem with a rogue trade unionist at Grangemouth who nearly brought the Scottish petrochemical industry to its knees.
This film reveals the truth behind the headlines of 3 industrial disputes and secret government plan that places corporate interests over those of the population to destroy community, collectivism and trade unions, where shareholder value and large profit are king. It is a plan that has long been suspected by many, but not proven. Until now. Rupert Murdoch arrived in Britain in 1969 and bought the Sun and the News of the World newspapers. In 1981, he bought the Times and the Sunday Times, with the promise that his papers would remain documents of record and politically impartial. The purchase being made just at the time Britain was moving towards Thatcher's Britain.
Yeah, 100,000 people worked here, and the history that, you know, and the characters was just amazing, you know, and it just gave so many people so much opportunity in life, because the conditions may have been harsh in the reality of working on the presses, but the social life, the money, the experience and the comradeship that it's just was that everyone just talks about how great it was. And my cousin worked here for years, my dad worked here for years before that, and my uncle as well, and that was why I saw it very much that this is where I wanted to go.
He'd said to us, if you can produce 1 million copies a day, I'll make you the best paid printers in Fleet Street. And over the following subsequent year, 18 months, 2 years, we were producing 3.25 million per night. It was an impossible figure, and yet we did it. And he came up, and this dirty old pullover he had, and he said, oh, who's dealing with this page? I said, well, I haven't seen anyone yet. I said, oh, I'll deal with it. Off he went, and he pulled over the proofs. And I think between us, we broke a record I think stood to the very end. During that early period, I had to go over to our union house to meet an Australian delegation, and they said, you're dealing with a snake here, which we obviously passed back to the senior union people, and they said, well, I'm sorry, but he's giving us work, and therefore we signed with him. Yes, we will watch him, but... And that's how it all started. Now, what that meant was that he was getting such a surplus of cash. He must have changed his mind into empire building.
One enjoys the feeling of power. We have more responsibility than power, I think. The newspaper can create great controversies, stir up arguments within the community, discussion, can throw light on injustices, just as it can do the opposite. It can hide things and be a great power for evil.
We received anecdotal evidence about Thatcher visiting Murdoch at his offices no less than 3 times. Each time she arrived through the back door. While unable to prove or deny this, evidence that Murdoch visited Thatcher during the bidding process for his purchase of the Sunday Times and the Times was found.
I think he played Maggie Thatcher. His big fear at that time was with the Sun, the News of the World, then the Times and the Sunday Times, and he had God knows how many magazines. They could have gone, it should have gone after him by the Monopolies Commission. And he was always worried about that. So how did you get out of that? You go and visit the Prime Minister at Chequers once a month or two.
But he denied ever meeting him.
Well, he's not telling the truth.
On the 4th of January 1981, Murdoch and Thatcher had a private meeting and lunch. These meetings remained secret for 30 years until Thatcher's papers were declassified. According to the notes of the lunch meeting, Murdoch updated the Prime Minister on the bidding process for the Times and the Sunday Times, and she did no more than wish him well. Immediately following the lunch, Thatcher returned to London and reshuffled her cabinet, giving the job of Trade Secretary to John Biffen. It was his job to refer the newspaper purchase to the Monopolies and Mergers Commission unless he alone was satisfied that the newspapers were running at a loss and that an urgent decision was required to save them.
Yeah, I don't suppose he ever met Tony Blair in Australia. I don't suppose he ever met Cameron. What was it? Well, about 5 times in a month, wasn't it, apparently? Of course it is. He's attacking the BBC.
On the 27th of January 1981, the Secretary of State announced that the purchase of the Times and the Sunday Times by Murdoch could go ahead without examination by the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, subject to certain conditions. Breach of any of the conditions would mean that Murdoch and his board could face a fine or go to prison. Documents which we have uncovered show that the day before the announcement, the Secretary of State for Trade told Murdoch that he was in favour of a referral. What happened in those 24 hours to change Biffen's mind? Declassified papers show that even though advice from the Attorney General to the Prime Minister clearly stated that ministers should not try and influence the Trade Secretary or give him their opinions, Thatcher reviewed Biffen's document, highlighting her preference in blue pencil for no referral. At around the same time, Harold Evans, the highly respected editor of the Sunday Times, stated that News International had already broken a number of the legal conditions of sale. No action was taken against Murdoch or his board, and despite conditions of purchase set down by the government, including political impartiality and editorial independence, Harold Evans was asked to leave soon after. The minutes of the Cabinet meeting held on the 26th of January that show opinions and comment were given to Biffen by Cabinet colleagues before he made his decision were declassified in 2011, a few months before Murdoch's evidence was submitted to the Leveson inquiry into media ethics and phone hacking. Much of Murdoch's Leveson evidence is classified for the next 100 years, but is available on the internet, and Murdoch's copy of Cabinet Minutes has the same copy number as Thatcher's classified Cabinet copy. In 1984, the UK National Coal Board announced the closure of Corton Wood Colliery near Barnsley in Yorkshire. The then President of the National Union of Mine Workers, Arthur Scargill, claimed that 70 pits were planned for closure. A national strike was called to protect the livelihoods and future employment within their communities. Despite official denials over the number of planned pit closures, recently declassified papers show that Arthur Scargill was correct. During the year-long miners' strike, he became one of the most famous people in Britain. Commentary, particularly in the Murdoch-owned press, quickly moved from a debate about the future of mining to Arthur Scargill and militant trade union power.
He would actually stop a paper. At times we felt there was some reporting that was over the top and unfair. There was a picture of Arthur Scargill waving, which they produced as if he was doing a Nazi salute, and that got right up our nose. No, can't touch that. You want this, it's not going with that picture. We took the picture out, we put a panel in, and they agreed the panel. because it said precisely, oh, you're doing it, not us.
For years, when I've heard the story of trade unions stopping the front pages, it has been about the trade union power. No one asks why the paper, the newspaper, were going to print this photograph, headline and article comparing Scargill to Hitler in the first place. Was this reporting the news or showing a lack of neutrality and forcing a political agenda on the population during the miners' strike? An industry that Murdoch himself had questioned the competitiveness of when he met Margaret Thatcher. Trade unions were legalised in the UK in 1824, following a period where organising to gain better working conditions were outlawed. The height of the trade union power was in the 1970s, when they brought down government. Even though numbers have halved, it is still the largest voluntary organisation in the UK, with approximately 6 million members, and still 10 times larger than the combined membership of the UK's main political parties. After the miners' strike in 1984, the mines closed. With traditional industries gone, successive governments did little to replace or revive these once thriving production communities.
It all started in the early 80s with the lovely Margaret Thatcher, but I think she introduced 18 or 19 separate pieces of legislation to stop us from acting collectively, and that were postal ballots, stop of secondary action, limit of how many people you can have a picket line, supplying names and addresses of all the members. All these things weren't brought in because the playing field wasn't even. They were brought in to make sure that we lose all the time. I think if you would have gone to a miner in Barnsley in 1984 and said in 30 years' time your kids and your grandkids are going to be working on 0 hours contracts, they would have laughed at you. If you go in any northern town now, any Yorkshire town or any town in the northeast, where we once had centres of industrial strength, now we've got all these industries that sell things. They don't create anything whatsoever, and they're actually built on the sites where pits used to be, where people used to earn a proper money and put something back into society.
In January 1986, the Fleet Street trade unions called a strike over the move of operations from Fleet Street to Wapping. In response, News International sacked over 5,500 people without notice. A 13-month dispute followed.
What's been signalled as the worst strike in Fleet Street for 40 years was given the go-ahead just after 7 o'clock. To try to make it effective, the print unions plan to stop News International distributing any papers it produces at the Wapping plant.
Yes, in any official dispute, the intention of that is to stop the product that the people in dispute normally work on coming out, and that's our intention.
Murdoch came out in jubilant mood to show off the first editions of his papers. There's several hundred quite angry people out there and they're saying that you've sacked 5,000 people, put them out of a job forever. How do you reply to their criticism?
Well, they went on strike. We asked them for 6 years to come here. We begged them that up to a year ago they wouldn't answer our telephone calls. They wouldn't listen to anything at all.
You know, he wanted to break the unions. She had just broke the miners. The print workers were another massively strong industrial trade union that she wanted to get rid of.
Well, his legal advice was get them to go out on strike and then sack them. And then you don't have to pay them. His trouble was he sacked them because half a dozen people had a meeting somewhere in the building and they said, oh, that's it, you're all sacked. Vast majority of people hadn't had a meeting, so we got sacked.
The legal advice Terry refers to is the advice received from News International's solicitor, Farrar & Co., who also advised the Queen. The lawyer states that if a moment came when it was necessary to dispense with the present workforce, the cheapest way of doing so would to be dismiss employees while participating in a strike or other industrial action. The solicitor also stated that it would be best to sack people on a Friday evening or over the weekend. Many of those who worked for Rupert Murdoch in Fleet Street were not at work the day that they were accused of going on strike. They were sacked anyway, along with 5,500 plus others. Not just printers, all those who worked at the offices in Fleet Street.
because the riot police were coming up here like full shields, and when they come at you, it'd be like a Zulu thing. They just beat their shields, so it's like boom, 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 like that as they come, and then they would scream when they run at you. So it was a real, like, you were just like, what is this England? What, you know, is this meant to be happening?
Most of our marches were on Saturdays from Tower Hill to the plant to simply stand in the way of the vehicles taking out papers, or delaying it, because if you delayed it long enough, that had an effect. There was a huge police presence. My wife was shoved by a big burly police sergeant, and she said, "Who are you pushing?" He said, "Look, lady, there's a big horse behind me, moving sideways down the pavement." And my wife said, "It's your bloody horse, you bloody deal with it." And I thought, oh no, because one thing we did, or were aware of, that police will, certain police anyway, will pressurise the women, causing the men to react and then get arrested. We'd known that from our knowledge of the miners' strike as well.
No one in my family was sacked because they worked in the Telegraph and the Express. However, you know, we was all part of the same, they was all part of the same union, and so everyone come down here, and also knowing that if we lost this, what detrimental effect it would have for every newspaper. I mean, it's obviously changed now, but you just wouldn't believe it. It was like almost like a First World War, looking at a First World War battlefield of, like, you know, different trenches and razor wire just in case you got through. And
you're surrounded by barbed wire, security gates, security men. Is that a good state of affairs?
No, we hate that. And we had a very valuable installation here, and we have to protect ourselves. And we also particularly have to protect the people who are working for us.
There were accusations of police taking sides. Documents received from the Home Office under a Freedom of Information request show that in May 1986, the Home Office Minister confirmed that the police were there to maintain the right of passage and the right to demonstrate. They were not working for Murdoch.
Couple deep all the way along, barriers everywhere, and they had certain procedures. And it soon came into view. There were nights when they wanted to be naughty and rough or anything. They'd take out any cameras. They took out the BBC cameras with Kate Adie. She was taken to hospital. Quite amazing, really. She's been all those war zones around the world, and there she is, comes to Wapping and gets beaten up. The cameras were smashed. They were shining great searchlight torches at them so they couldn't get pictures. And you knew as soon as that was going on, there was going to be a roughhouse of some sort.
my dad, right, probably here actually, gave me the worst bit of advice in my life that I've ever had, and that was, if you run, they'll think you've done something wrong and they'll hit you. Yeah, that was the worst bit of advice I ever had, because I stood here with him and my mum, and he put his arms around both of us like that, and I just was looking down while the police, after they were charging, full riot gear around you. And I remember just looking down but thinking, don't look up, don't look up. But I looked up and just saw someone laying there as a copper just run past. And as he ran past, he just bent down and just smacked him straight in the head with a truncheon. And it didn't matter if they were women, kids, adults, nothing. It was an absolute, you know, you ain't coming back here. We're going to make sure that you get the message.
The police and the Home Office denied any allegations of wrongdoing, but documents we received as a result of Freedom of Information requests included the December issue of the 1986 Police Review magazine, which describes the police briefings. The senior officer explained that the police presence was to ensure that News International employees could get in and out of the plant unimpeded. The second police job was to ensure that the distribution lorries taking the papers out of the plant are not obstructed. The size of the demonstration forces officers to close off roads. Residents can get very frustrated.
My son goes to that school over there. Every day for the last 4 weeks we have suffered insults at the hands of some of your officers. Been told to bog off. He's been told he'd be arrested along with me for making a protest. A woman's husband is missing for 3 nights because he's in Old Street Nick. And you call that serving our best interests? Well, I say you're not on. We want to go down there with our children and deliver our letter. And we demand you protect us. We're ratepayers, we're paying your wages. You protect us to take our letter down there to Murdoch's plant.
After all, you protect Murdoch's lorries bumming round our streets at high speed every flipping night.
Because senior officers briefed on the protecting of Murdoch Enterprise, but not on either the right of passage or the right to demonstrate, then it is unsurprising that the police on the ground were bound to follow orders and protect Murdoch's businesses over and above the rights of the workforce and residents.
The police today are governed by a general principle of the use of force must be reasonable and it must be justified. And my understanding is that those general principles would still have been in place in the 1980s. The police forces, both nationally and locally, will of course have their own manuals, their own tactical guidance, their own handbooks and so on. But my understanding is that that doesn't affect the general legal principle that police must use only reasonable force.
After much searching, we found reference to the Police Tactical Operations Handbook in Hansard, the parliamentary record. This was the police procedural handbook used at Wapping. It was first used the year before during the miners' strike. Tony Benn MP had requested the handbook be placed in the library of the Houses of Parliament, to which we gained access. The original was only a few pages and obviously extracted from a much larger manual. The original was also 2 pages shorter than a copy received at the same time. These 2 additional pages in the copy version dealt with the use of truncheons and horses. Truncheons are supplied to police officers to protect themselves if violently attacked. Officers should aim at the arms and legs.
Nonsense. Didn't happen.
What did happen?
Once a man is suffering from red eye, his training is not good enough to stick to that. He will hit anything that moves. People were being hit like that. But, yeah, no, they use them. They use them. They didn't have to use batons either. They grabbed pickets taken behind the line and just beat them up. And then they accused us of all sorts of things.
So for the use of mounted horses, so the warning should always be given, it shouldn't be a densely packed crowd, and they should have somewhere to go.
I take it the people on the horses couldn't read all right. Are they going to hit them on the arms? From up there on the horse? The nearest thing to them is their heads. So, sorry, they hit them.
Obviously, if a police officer has acted contrary to guidance, that is one issue. If a police officer has acted contrary to the law, that is another issue. And if a member of the public made a complaint about that, one would hope that that would be properly investigated. Similarly, even if a member of the public didn't make a complaint, but that officer's superiors became aware that there was an issue about his or her behaviour, one would hope that was investigated.
The Police Tactical Operations Manual was created after the Brixton riots of 1981. While most of its 500 pages remain secret, we found a number of files that show the development of this manual. These recently declassified files confirm the handbook as a most important landmark in policing in the UK.
I've seen some parts of the manual, I'm looking at it now, that deal, for example, with a manoeuvre called a short shield baton carrying team that's deployed into a crowd. And the manual appears to suggest that it's acceptable to use this team to disperse a crowd and incapacitate missile throwers and ringleaders by striking in a controlled manner with batons about the arms and legs or torso. The use of force to incapacitate missile throwers remains subject to the general principles of self-defence, and it's only appropriate to use reasonable force if missiles have been thrown and the police are in serious danger. This does appear to suggest that force that goes beyond that is being authorised. It is a concern that potentially the wording of this goes beyond what is appropriate. I've seen also references to short shield teams being deployed into a crowd. Presumably those are ones without batons, and it talks about those officers running at the crowd in pairs to disperse and or incapacitate. That doesn't even refer to incapacitating missile throwers, so an officer may well read that as being a general authority to incapacitate, which of course would be unlawful unless those officers are required to use force in self-defence.
While the Home Office publicly proclaimed that the Tactical Operations Manual was a private Association of Chief Police Officers document, recently declassified Home Office files show that it was the Home Office and not the police who instigated the complete revision of British police tactics. It was the Home Office who, over almost 3 years, set up the committee, hosted the meetings, reviewed the drafts, raised serious concerns as to the use of horses and dogs, attended every meeting and briefed the chair. They also hosted a celebratory drinks party. When the document was being reviewed by the Home Office just prior to publication, reservations were made as to Home Office involvement, and that this document and the Home Office involvement would one day become public. A Freedom of Information request shows that the government knew no warning was given to the crowd before the deployment of officers on horseback. While the police blamed the ferocity and suddenness of violence from the crowd, deploying horses into a crowd without warning is contrary to the police handbook that we have seen, and the government thus knew about police mistakes, not least that the handbook had not been followed.
If the government knew that people hadn't followed the manual, had gone further than the manual, then of course that's a concern. And one would expect that those officers' conduct was investigated and indeed any instructions that they were given was looked at.
An investigation into specific complaints did take place. This was supervised by the newly formed Police Complaints Authority, who also reported on excessive police violence to the Home Office. Young officers found themselves running around, not being told what to do, not knowing the local geography. They mounted charges on people with nowhere to escape. Those directing operations were far away at headquarters. Officers were simply not sufficiently physically fit for public order work. Police officers set off to chase ringleaders and had to give up. Obesity brought on by huge meals and gallons of beer. Despite having this knowledge, calls for public inquiry to examine the mistakes and responsibility on both sides were dismissed by government.
Policing in the UK is now, and always has been, policing by consent, and that operates on a basic principle that the police enjoy a certain amount of trust, but that trust has to be earned, and that trust cannot be delivered if there is not transparency about what the police do. And the same applies to other state agents who should declare and be upfront and clear about their actions, and that includes accepting when their actions have fallen short of what's expected.
Of the 1,000 police officers involved in the Wapping anniversary violence, 230 were fully investigated and 26 were charged with perjury to common assault. Most of these cases were thrown out of court because of delays to the investigation, often caused by the Metropolitan Police themselves. From a Freedom of Information request we received, no senior officers were charged and no other officer was ever convicted over police actions at Wapping.
Because as people, we're only fed half the truth anyway. And then it's only the truth that they want you to know. It's not what's in a newspaper, it's what's not in the newspaper that counts.
That's why we're bloody angry, because I've seen it, you know, we witnessed it here. We saw what the police in the state could do. Murdoch had his own private army that we would have won if he never had. But that was the ethos. The ethos was, the 80s was to change everything.
In 2006, and under a Labour government, the Royal Mail lost its 350-year-old monopoly status and faced full competition. During 2007, and just prior to the global economic crash of 2008, the Posties trade union, the CWU, called a number of national strikes. The Labour government reported that over 627,000 employee days were lost as a result of industrial action. 60% of days lost to strikes across the whole of the UK economy. What the report admits is that the Royal Mail Group still made an operating profit of £162 million, which, while down a third, was still ahead of expectations. Royal Mail accounts also confirm that landmark agreements on pay, pension and modernisation were in place. Burslem Sorting Office in Stoke-on-Trent, and one of the many strong trade union branches considered militant by some Royal Mail managers, had negotiated its own local agreements.
The words business started to turn up all the time instead of the service we were giving to the people. Business has changed. And it has changed. When you go in and look in there now, what work's being done and how it's being done, it was always going to change.
It's got to change, really.
Yeah, it was always going to change.
You've got to modernise, haven't you?
Yeah, and that's right. With Sunday openings, the competition out there, you change it. The difference was when we did stuff, we negotiated how it changed.
It was being privatised. It was being set up for privatisation. So these things don't happen on their own.
No.
This was the European model, like I say, to get to privatise Royal Mail because it was profitable. It was sold off on the cheap. It was making 100 million, 200 million pound a year profit. It was being fed back into the postal service for 20 years, and suddenly people thought, well, no, we'll get our hands on that money. So you've got to do something with the workforce and with the industry to make it saleable.
While implementing its modernisation plan, Royal Mail suspended 12 postmen with collective employment at Royal Mail of over 200 years, based on one accusation of bullying and harassment and without investigation, in breach of the agreed conduct and disciplinary code. A walkout by most of the remaining staff resulted in 35 consecutive days of industrial action just to get the 12 men dealt with under the agreed disciplinary procedures.
They come in and just took us out. Instead of being interviewed, when you talk about the conduct of it, we might as well not talk about any of that shit. But it's fine.
And then call the police.
But that's what I'm saying. Show me in the conduct code where it says, lock you upstairs and get the police in.
They locked us in that canteen for about 4 hours, and about 50 managers descended on the office, all in cars come flying in like the Sweeney. A riot van that I'd passed on my way to work, had been parked nearby, and a dog van. I don't know what sort of picture they painted to the police.
I'll take your photos, are you? You're on videoing. Well, evidence.
So you talk about militants and anarchists and call it what you want, terrorists if you want. We were treated worse than that. We were guarded. They brought guys in to guard us.
The suspensions followed a petition against bullying by managers. The Royal Mail initially denied the action was premeditated or that the police were called by them. Other managers provide conflicting views, and a response to a Freedom of Information request confirms that the police were contacted 48 hours prior to the suspensions.
It's like it was the people they'd chosen, which they were going to take out. And then he walked in, locked the door, put a pile of letters there, and told us we'd all been suspended. But they tried to deny us representation. Told us we couldn't use his mobile phones, which obviously, we did.
They annexed us from the rest of the group, the rest of the lads. And it was obvious that they were just after the union. Get rid of them. Chop the head off the beast and the rest will fall down. I mean, even the manager turned round to the media and said we were a cancer that needed cutting out.
Completely and utterly in the open. We needed to ballot for industrial action, so we had to go through a formal process. Everything Royal Mail did was deceitful.
After 35 days, Royal Mail Burslem office in Stoke-on-Trent agreed to follow their own procedures and investigate the claims of bullying. A Royal Mail informant said, those people were targeted. What they were basically trying to do was cut the union.
How are you going to have respect for people like that? The chap saying, well, what else are you going to do? You've got nothing else, go get another job then. Your pots have gone, your pits have gone, you've got nothing. Take it, else get yourself off. They lost their industries, they didn't want to lose their job again. They try to make us out as if we were anti-management, but they make you anti-management, they make you like that. It's described as a crusade, wasn't it? We were on a crusade. Perhaps we were in the end, but that's only how they make you.
What happened at Burslem in 2007 and 8 represents what was happening not only across Royal Mail as they prepared to privatise, but across businesses, government and media everywhere. Shift the focus in a profitable business from friendships, community, camaraderie, just treatment of the workforce towards greater profit and shareholder return through creating a more compliant workforce. One of the many companies that was privatised in the 1980s was British Petroleum. The BP petrochemical site at Grangemouth in Scotland was ultimately bought by Ineos Chemicals Group, whose main shareholder and CEO is Jim Ratcliffe, a British chemical engineer. It is believed the company borrowed £9 billion to buy the site, paying interest of about $500 million per year.
It was a complete cultural change. It was on
the kind of baser instincts of people, because it was all about individualism. So everybody was put onto personal contracts, so there was no collectivism at all. But because of the nature of our industry, the company arguably played a blinder in terms of still recognising the union for health and safety purposes.
The company had set up a new company, INEOS Chemicals. And we questioned it. Is this a move to transfer assets? We were told by the director, no, not at all. We need to set up a Scottish company, because if we're looking for a £9 million grant from the Scottish government, then they're looking for a kind of Scottish company.
In 2008, INEOS and their workforce had a dispute over pensions, which affected petrol supplies across Britain. The union won. In 2013, about 1,300 people worked at the INEOS plant, with thousands more in the local community and Scotland, reliant upon jobs dependent upon the plant's success. At this time, Stevie Deans, an employee of 25 years, was accused by the Labour Party of vote rigging. This was investigated twice by Police Scotland, who confirmed there was no case to answer.
I was under attack almost from day one. It really ramped up a gear when they started to talk about potential candidates for the forthcoming general election. Part of that political strategy, engaging with various different branches of the union, encouraging members of those branches to join or rejoin the Labour Party, to have an influence in the Labour Party, unashamedly for the trade unions to have an influence in the Labour Party, was something that we had set out to do as a union. The ultimate issue was the allegations of vote rigging.
I am angry about this. I'm incredibly angry by what's happened, because I think certain people have let down this party, and I'm not going to let it happen.
During the investigation into vote rigging, INEOS suspended Stevie along with another trade union official who later won his unfair dismissal case.
What the company did the very night that they suspended me was they wrote to every employee and told them that they'd suspended me. And it's despite the fact that quite clearly their own policy on disciplinary action or suspensions pending investigation is that these matters are private and confidential. But they wrote to everyone, they emailed everyone, and they put it out on the company intranet webpage.
Well, when we started getting people knocking at the door asking for my dad, and finally I kind of triggered that it was journalists and that something major had happened. When my dad started appearing on the national news every night, it was a bit heartbreaking. His laptop had got taken away from him, and a few other personal items had been taken by the police to be investigated. To see my dad being publicly victimised, wrongly victimised.
What did they call your dad?
A criminal, basically.
Well, for the first time in my life, ever, I had to take up the services of criminal lawyers. But I had to have them on speed dial in case the police turned up at the door. I don't think I could really take it in, the injustice of it all, because here was something that was very, very serious, and there were numerous allegations of what I had supposedly done, and the Labour Party that I'd been a member of since I was 16 years old decided that this was a reasonable and just course of action to take in terms of investigating this issue without even asking the person who's been accused.
Following a trade union request, the employees voted overwhelmingly in support of Stevie and strike action. A strike was threatened but withdrawn when the company responded, shut down the plant in a cold condition. INEOS announced that the plant would remain closed until 4 conditions, which they called the survival plan, were met. No employee action for 3 years, a grant from government to help transform the plant into a facility that could accept shale gas, a renegotiation of the pricing received from BP, and a revision of the terms and conditions of the employees on payment of a lump sum.
It's my belief, and it was our belief as a branch, the company orchestrated the whole thing. Actually, what happened, what was happening with myself and the Labour Party gave them an opening, gave them an opportunity slightly earlier than they had planned, I believe, to take the union on.
In email correspondence and briefing notes for the Minister that we have seen, the UK government did question INEOS about a potential strike action. While Stevie Deans had been suspended from his job and was facing potential prison sentence, the arbitration talks between INEOS and the trade union broke down. And the company, ignoring the trade union, asked the employees directly whether or not they supported the proposed changes to their terms and conditions. The employees were given just a few days to decide. If they did not agree, the company made it clear that a rejection of the plan would result in liquidation of the business. The outcome of the vote was a 50-50 split.
It looms large on Scotland's industrial landscape, and this was a big moment in the history of the Grangemouth refinery as morning broke on decision day. Management had decided on its next step in a dispute with the workforce. Waves of employees attended back-to-back meetings in the staff canteen to be told it was closure of half the site.
You know, sitting in front of 700 people delivering this news this morning, there was a lot of emotions and a lot of tears, and there still is a lot in that there. But the company has genuinely tried, and the management of this company have put together this survival plan.
For the plug to be pulled in the way the plug was pulled at that time was just absolutely devastating, to be honest. That's why people were in tears and coming out there, you know, it was, you know, devastating. It's just a case of, this is it. And you comply or we are closing the place down.
There's more of a finality to the plant being closed. It was almost like a doomsday kind of scenario. It was an all or nothing strategy from the employer to break the union, to put the workforce in a position where they were scared for their jobs, their livelihoods. Our members did not go on strike. They did not take industrial action. They were trying at all costs to avoid taking any action whatsoever, and we did take no action. The company had a strike. The company shut the factory down.
With media focus primarily on the trade union and talk breakdowns, Stevie's emails were leaked to the Murdoch-owned Sunday Times.
At that point we'd stopped buying every single newspaper, but eventually I'd discovered that there was this in the Sunday Times and wondered where this information had came from, if it was a police investigation.
It was a game that Ratcliffe and INEOS were playing. It's a very dangerous game in terms of our community, our livelihoods, you know, wider Scotland, because what they proposed to do in closing the chemicals business was basically to walk away and to leave the taxpayer a bill for hundreds of millions of pounds for cleaning up the site.
And after they made that announcement about the closure, we did go in and said to them, look, you're not placing that blame on us. You walk away for this plant, then you walk away for this plant on your own free will, and the knowledge that it's you as a company that have chose to close this down. Because what we're going to do right now is to accept this survival plan collectively on behalf of all these people, despite them saying they've rejected it, because we're not prepared to see this site close. We're not prepared to see this community devastated.
Government papers that we have uncovered under an appeal of a rejected Freedom of Information request show that despite what was in the papers, it was in fact INEOS who were refusing talks and the union were wishing to negotiate and keep the plant open.
When the company came in and said, we're closing the chemicals business, it's at that point that I said, I'm just taking myself out of this, and resigned. When I left work at Grangemouth and I wasn't in a good place, I think I did have a breakdown. I actually, at the time, I think I was also saying to myself, I just want to go away. I was exonerated by the Labour Party, exonerated by Police Scotland. I think I've now been exonerated by Police Scotland twice. So that's all well and good now, and being able to say, well, you know, I have been exonerated, but it sticks. It does stick with you. Is it only just and right that we can campaign, take it to the heart of where the problem is? You take it to the investors. Do people want to invest in a company and that are doing bad things? For anybody to suggest that it's in some way inappropriate and that it should be outlawed is an attack on democracy and the right for people to demonstrate.
This sort of industrial intimidation is bad for Britain. It very nearly cut off petrol supplies to a large part of our United Kingdom.
Some people may well find that sort of thing distasteful. Everybody's kind of wired differently and everybody's got different opinions on that. But what the majority of people and the majority of the members found distasteful was getting threatening letters through the door to their wives and families on threatening their livelihoods and their futures from the company.
At first I was upset, and then as I started realising everything that was actually happening, I became more angry at the fact that it was happening to my dad and happening to us, and why it was happening to us, and why a man with so much power has the power that he has and nobody can do anything about it.
As would be expected, government met with the trade union and the company during the dispute. Many of the freedom of information requests we have made on INEOS have been rejected as they relate to the creation of government policy and various third parties, so the government does not have to be transparent. We appealed. The appeals from the Cabinet Office were rejected. The Department of Business responded, still refusing to release any information on INEOS as they are a third party, but they did release information relating to the trade union representative Pat Rafferty, who, despite also being a third party, was not afforded the same treatment as the corporation. While there are good and not so good companies, trade unions and trade unionists, it seems that all trade unions are lumped together as one and the same, and individuals are scrutinised and held accountable for their actions in a way that the government and company actions are not.
We have a real problem with a rogue trade unionist at Grangemouth who nearly brought the Scottish petrochemical industry to its knees.
I think they were initially just looking for a scapegoat, and I think he jumped on the fact that my dad, all the media was focusing on my dad and all the hype around him, and they just used him to fall back in their plans that were already put in place. And there's so many people today who pick up a newspaper, read a story and believe it straight away. They don't look for they don't read between the lines, they don't question what the media say, because the media have so much power that they can do that, especially in newspapers, on the telly, everything that people watch, they just believe it these days. And I think that's exactly what people did with my dad, and just went against him. I just asked him why, well, especially Jim Ratcliffe, why he took out on my dad. What did my dad do to deserve it? What did we do to deserve everything that we got? We're just ordinary people. And my dad especially didn't deserve it.
Throughout this dispute, as was the case with others, the company forced the action. Government seemed to place corporate interest over and above that of the workforce. We can now prove that this shift to protect corporate interests was all planned. In the 1980s, Thatcher not only started a reform of the trade union laws and UK policing, the impact of which has been shown in the 3 disputes highlighted in this film, but also created a secret policy that set out to radically change British values. Not only planning to privatise the NHS, but also our schools. To change the education system. Less reliance on the state and more on entrepreneurship. Corporate interests at the fore. Also to encourage new industries without trade unions, the aim being to halve trade union membership by the year 2000, to replace collectivism with the individual, and to remove any association between the Labour Party and the trade unions. A secret policy where the corporation means more to government than you or me.
What is the legal implication of any government policy that seeks to limit union participation? And the short answer to that is that Article 11 of the Human Rights Convention, which is now in domestic law, protects the right to associate. Article 11.2 sets out the only circumstances in which that right to associate can be interfered with. If, for example, it is necessary to limit union participation to prevent crime, and it's proportionate, then that is acceptable. And so unless attempts to limit someone's right to associate are justified under Article 11.2, they will be unlawful.
We've just got to instill in people's minds that they have got power, they have got strength, and they are important. Whereas the employers will tell people you aren't important, you're just a number and you can be replaced.
The poorest in our society didn't cause the biggest recession since the 1930s. They did. From the 80s onwards, the mantra was regulation's bad, having to be accountable is bad. And the rich and the wealthy and the powerful, with all the global power and all the global capital, get then help from legislation to make it even hard for us to say, do you know what, you just can't sack 6,000 British workers if you've come over from Australia and you've decided to take over our national newspapers. But what we come against was the British government colluding with that person to make him, you know, one of the richest men in the world, while people's lives, families, mortgages, you know, fell apart.
For more than 30 years, business and government have colluded to shift power to corporate and shareholder, a plan long suspected but secret until now. The Trade Union 2000 plan was just one policy agreed by the Thatcher government behind closed doors. An ideology reflected in the actions of successive governments and our media since Murdoch bought the Times and the Sunday Times. Even though policy to discourage trade unions breaches our human rights, government and business have run roughshod, which impacts us all.
Because it's about normal people who just want to earn a living, probably pass on a better life to their children. And what it's about is a state and a greedy media mogul deciding that I'm going to take all that away and I'm going to have cheaper labour, non-unionised labour, and a government who actually were quite favourable in regard to the headlines and the support they knew they could get from the biggest national newspaper in the country.
With new legislation and a repeal of the Human Rights Act, there is little sign of this power abating in post-Brexit Britain. The greater the power, the more dangerous the abuse.
They gathered in their masses outside the factory gates, the pickets and policemen with their truncheons full of hate. The pressmen say we caused this and deserve the consequence, but you and I know different, they're all so fucking bent. But we've got strength in numbers and I'm a union man. Stand up and fight for justice, stand up, hey, for the working man. But we've got strength in